And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan broadcasting from Galați, far east of Romania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson broadcasting from Deutschland. Our producer James Huff making sure everything works just fine, broadcasting from the States. And we have a guest for the first segment of this show, Mr. Mike Buchanan, president of the Justice for Men and Boys and the Women Who Love Them political party over in the United Kingdom. Greetings, everyone. Greetings, Jon. Greetings, Mike.
Greetings, Lucian. Nice to be here.
Okay, it's nice to have you here. Right, let's get this baby started first with you. We're not going to waste time talking about the weather. Who am I kidding? How's the weather in London?
It's hot and dry as usual.
Right, Jon, how's the weather in Germany?
It's cold and wet.
Ah, really? Here it's been hot and dry. So it's a mixture of the two. It's been 12 degrees Celsius both during the day and during the night, but it kept on raining. It's amazingly annoying. So, yeah. Right. Weather talk, it counts. So let's talk about the conference. Last week we covered an element about an article from, I think it was Sports 365, an article criticizing Birmingham FC for attempting to host the upcoming international conference on men's issues coming up in 2018. Tell us a little bit about that, Mike.
Yeah, it was you're right. It was the Football 365 website. The article was a savage attack on J4MB, and but it wasn't attributed. But we've since found out it was a guy called Daniel Story, who's a well-known blogger. He has over 30,000 followers on Twitter, and it was a scandalous piece, really, to be quite honest with you. He had in the comment section, which is still up, I think, some support from a few people, but an awful lot of people supported the conference going ahead. Paul Elam's comments alone, I think, got over 80 upvotes. We had support from Karen Strawn, Alison Tiemann, and lots of well-known people, Janice Mango. But the long and the short of it is that about 2 hours after 2 or 3 hours after the piece was published, Birmingham City, a director of Birmingham City, emailed me terminating the contract. And now there was nothing in the contract that would allow him to do that. Nothing in the contract terms, but
that's what I was about. That's what I was about to ask. Was it legal, or there was any clause in the contract that allowed them to do that?
No. There was nothing in the contract allowing for unilateral cancellation on their part. And the way they got around it was probably the only way they could, was by saying that I had misrepresented Justice for Men and Boys and and the conferences and so on.
How?
It was never specified. Well, I had a sort of email exchange with the guy, but it was, he sort of said what he thought. They'd assumed it was about fathers' rights and just about that kind of area. And it was a blatant lie, Lucian. It was just nonsense.
Well, it was about fathers' rights and other stuff.
Indeed, but so much more. And I sent him a lot of material, explaining, how explaining the misleading statements in the article and so on. But I think they made their decision, and they weren't going to reverse it.
Right. So sorry.
So the long and the short of it is that it won't be held. The conference won't be held in Birmingham next year, but I'm expecting it to be held possibly later in July in London. And we're in talks with the venue that we considered for last year's conference. Talks are going very well, and I'm hoping that we'll sign a contract in the next week or two.
No, that's really nice. At least if I'm coming, I know how to get there.
Yes.
Right.
At the end of the day, while Birmingham is the second city of the UK in terms of population, at about 1.1 million, London's around 8 million, and London and the southeast has a population of a lot more than that. So it's back in London.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about the media reaction to the whole brouhaha. I mean, other than Football 365, did anyone else react in any way, either positive or negative?
The only other media coverage that resulted was a piece in the Birmingham Mail by a guy called Danny Hussein, who left the paper about 2 days later, it wasn't a great piece. I'd done I guess a fairly amateurish 18-minute promotional video for the conference, taking people through the rooms that we'd use and so on, and they extracted just over a minute from that. Really sort of silly extract. So, for example, they had the piece where I point to the big LED screen in the corner of the stadium, and said that we could have anything that we wanted on there during the conference, but the club might just object to feminism is cancer. So it was kind of stuff like that, and also that there was a thing where in one of the rooms, in one of the executive box rooms, where all of which have toilets, I said, "Oh, there's something sexist here." So I went over to the toilets, and it had a sign saying "ladies" on it, and I said, something like, we'll have none of this nonsense here. There's plenty of toilets for the ladies. We'll have this exchange for gentlemen, and and this is supposed to offend people. It's just it was fairly pathetic. They even used an image of me off the internet, which is a very blurred, a slightly strange image, rather than I could have provided one. They could have got a modern one a new one off the internet. So it was all kind of a bit depressing, really. But I suppose if there's an upside to this, it's better that they cancelled now than cancel a week before the conference, when
Right.
people would be committed to hotels, travel, and all the rest of it.
Right. Jon, wanted to ask something?
Yeah, I mean, these kinds of comments that they're pulling out to show that you're a misogynist or whatever, they're the kind of stuff that offends maybe the Guardian reading, latte sipping elites, but average people, I don't think they particularly care about that sort of stuff. So
no, and I'm sure the average person, I mean, at the end of the day, 99% of the club's ticket income comes from men.
Yep.
And the idea that those guys on the terraces, are going to be, upset by that kind of thing, it was just nonsense, absolute nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, most people understand the joke and they're not offended by silly things like that.
Indeed, but yeah, I mean, but it's all. I guess it's all to do with justifying a very stupid decision and the termination. And they didn't even contact. They didn't even have the courtesy of contacting me beforehand to say that's what they intended to do. Did I have any comments? It was thoroughly unprofessional.
Yep.
Do you have any? Do you have any legal grounds to act against them?
Well, I mean, they were very clearly in breach of contract, but the law in the UK is not great in that area, especially if you're a long way out from when the contract is going to be performed.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a legal obligation on us to mitigate any losses. And with 9 months to go before the conference, it's obviously possible to find another venue. So no, our legal options, are not great.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We spent around £1,500 on all sorts of materials and design and so on in connection with the Birmingham conference. So I should be seeking, I should be seeking that back from them.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't do that, then I'll take them to the small claims court, because I mean they've already wasted enough of our time and money. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is precisely what I had in mind. I mean, at the very least, you printed leaflets and whatnot. That's certainly some effort and definitely some money to at least print them, and not to mention distribute them and so on and so forth. Which is essentially a complete loss. So someone is going to pay for that. And considering how many of this kind of nonsense men's rights activists have already paid, maybe it's bloody time sometimes at least we don't get to support these losses.
Yep, agreed.
Right. Right. So we just know it's in London. We don't know exactly the venue. Do we know anything about the speakers?
Yes, if people go to the conference website, which is icmi18.wordpress.com, they'll see, I think, probably 13 speakers there, and we're hoping for a total of 15. We're slightly reducing the numbers compared to the London conference, where we had 20, and a few people told me they thought that was a bit rushed, a little bit too packed. So rather than 20, we're going for 15 this time, and I'm hopeful that we'll have another Conservative MP speaking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So that means I stand no chance of speaking at this conference. I'm joking. I don't even know I'll be on whether I'll be on the same continent when the conference is being held.
Yeah.
But nevertheless, I had to put that in there.
So we have to say 13 of the speakers, I think. Some well-known faces, but most not well known. But they include, for the first time, a cleric.
Mm.
And it's a guy called the Reverend Jules Gomes, or Gomez. I'm not quite sure how he pronounces it, but he's known as the Rebel Priest, and he blogs as the Rebel Priest on the Conservative Woman website, a very important website. And his thesis is basically that feminists have destroyed the Church of England beyond repair.
Well, that's not a particularly complicated case to make.
It's not, but we haven't had a cleric speak before.
Yes.
I think that's going to go down. It's pretty controversial, at the end of the day. So I think that's going to go down. That's going to go down very well. We also have, for the first time at an ICMI, William Collins, who to my mind is the number one blogger on individual men's issues in the world.
I see.
Just a brilliant man, quite frankly, and he analyzes things to a depth that, and to an extent that nobody else does, I don't think.
I see. Yeah, quite frankly, I think it's good to have fewer speakers, because when it comes to these kinds of conferences, it's the socialization that occurs between the speeches and after the speeches that matters a lot more than the actual formal part of the conference itself. I mean, last year in London, the most important part of the conference, at least for me, was when we stood up until 5 a.m. in the parking lot of the hotel with Karen and all of the rest of the of those of us that actually are civilized people and still do smoke, and we had lots of beers, and the hotel staff was just stunned that none of us was tired at 5 a.m. And we were like, we just stood up until 5 a.m. We slept till 7 a.m. Oh, and by the way, we have to hold a speech in front of a crowd in about 2 hours.
It's amazing that nobody nods off during the speeches, or perhaps they do and they're prodded. I'm not sure. But no, you're right. It's difficult to. It's actually difficult to communicate how much of a pleasure that is, Lucian, isn't it? It's
it
is
is.
so worth. When people say, "Oh, the money and so on," my God, for to spend 3 days in the company of people like you and Karen and so on, and Paul, just so many others. It's an absolute. It's the best value for money in the world, I think.
Yeah, and considering that oftentimes at these conferences, the people from very far away are coming in. I mean, last year in London, I spoke with people from Australia, which I probably will meet again maybe 5 years from now. Best case scenario. I mean, people have been traveling several days to get to the conference by plane. So yeah, I mean, it is a very decent value for the shekel, for sure. Right.
Well,
conference.
we had people from 20 countries in London. I mean, which I think was quite amazing, really.
Right. Conference matters aside, your political party has also made quite a splash in the media for another issue, namely circumcision. You've held anti-circumcision rallies. You also have AVFM has assisted with creating a dossier, a glossary, maybe I should say, of doctors that are particularly egregious in their practices, both in the United Kingdom and the United States and other places. There has been recently another, you mentioned before we got on live, there has been some development on a piece of news that we also covered on the Voice of Europe several times. So please get into that.
Okay. In case anyone's not aware of this, it's to do with I'll go through the history very quickly. It's to do with a doctor called Dr. Balvinda Mehat, who carries out circumcisions in Nottingham. And perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, he circumcised a young boy. I think just a few months old at the time. Now, his mother was a local girl, and the father was a Muslim, but the relationship broke down before the baby was born. So the mother had full parental responsibility from day one. Anyway, so one weekend when the baby was with his father and paternal grandparents, his father and his father's mother took him to Dr. Mehat, and the circumcision was done. The first that the mother knew was when he was brought home that evening, and she opened his nappy to clean him, to find it full of blood. And she became hysterical, as you can imagine. And she's an astonishingly strong young woman, and she wants justice done. The police investigation into that was absolutely derisory. The Crown Prosecution Service could not have been less interested. And then onto the scene came a female lawyer who's really got a grip on this. And about, I think, 3 or 4 months ago, the boy's father and his mother, that is the father's mother, were both arrested on suspicion of
grievous bodily
harm with intent, or conspiring to have that done, which is under the 1861 Offences Against a Person Act, carries a penalty of up to lifetime imprisonment. So a very, very serious crime. But today we learnt that the CPS are not going to prosecute. And we always predicted that they couldn't, because as soon as they, a successful prosecution would antagonize, in particular, the Jewish lobbies and the Muslim lobbies. But under the law of the land, there are no exemptions permissible on religious or cultural grounds. So there's no question whatsoever that non-therapeutic circumcision of male minors or male genital mutilation is a crime in the UK, as it is in many countries. But the criminal justice system just will not bring prosecutions. So the lawyer is getting back on the case, and she's really, she's like a dog with a bone. And frankly, I think the day will come that we'll put up a statue to this woman. She is just an absolute force of nature.
Yeah. So hold on.
And she is not quitting.
So you're saying that under the current UK law, circumcision is a crime even with the parents' consent?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. Because it's actual bodily harm or grievous bodily harm under the 1861 Act, it is illegal by virtue of that. There is no need for a specific MGM Act, although there is a specific FGM Act in 1985. But that also was not necessary. And of course, feminists lobbied only for an FGM Act. They really couldn't be bothered with MGM.
Yeah, if you remember,
so the legal position is unquestioned, and we've sent lots of freedom of information requests and more to government departments, and they have never denied that MGM is illegal. Of course, they'll never admit it, But they always sort of, it's like trying to get hold of an eel in the barrel. They will always evade FOI requests. They'll always find a form of words.
Yeah, if you remember, Jon, when we were discussing about it, I was saying that politically it is a fantastic case because we get to see Mike's theory tested in court in some way, shape, or form. Because yeah, it has been for quite several years. It has been Mike's contention that MGM is essentially illegal in the United Kingdom. Now, I'm not a common law lawyer, but looking upon the pieces of legislation that Mike's referencing, he seems to have a point.
Yeah, we have. I mean, I really don't expect anyone to take me as an authority on the law, even in the law of the UK. But we know from a human rights lawyer who sadly does not wish to be in the public eye. But we know from him that it is illegal under the 1861 Act, and furthermore that it would require a parliamentary override to be legal. Now that override has never existed. So MGM is by definition illegal in the UK. There's absolutely no one is denying it.
So what are the options that this particular lawyer, female lawyer that she's still on the Nottingham case, what are the particular options that she has now, considering that the Crown Prosecution Service just says that they won't prosecute for grievous bodily harm?
Well, she's basically I'm not sure the exact details of it, but she's sent a 24-page letter. I mean, this is some woman. She's a 24-page letter pointing out how absurd that decision is. It's not based on it is clearly an unsound decision. So she is say exactly how she's going about it, Lucian, I'm not sure, but she is not going to give up on this.
So she's essentially trying to force, via some administrative courts, to force the Crown Prosecution Service to take the case anyway.
Exactly so.
I see.
So. I mean,
right.
At the moment, the CPS are saying that there's no realistic prospect of a conviction, but that is simply absurd. It is so absurd. I mean, the Crown Prosecution Service know damn well that if there's a prosecution, it will succeed. I mean, this is a particularly egregious case.
Yeah, and even if it won't, I mean, if a crime has been committed and there's evidence that the crime has been committed, it is still the duty of the prosecution service to at least try, even if they suspect that the judge might disagree or things of that nature.
But it's high. The CPS is so highly politicized. I mean,
of course,
we see that, of course, in the prosecutions of people like Mark Pearson, who was at the conference last year. With literally no evidence of sexual offences, but they're still hauled before the courts.
Especially considering the context of all of this. I mean, they prosecuted Mark Pearson with based on a lot fewer, on a lot less evidence.
No evidence.
Or no evidence, to be more precise. Yeah. So in this particular case, even what we know from the media and what you've told us now, it's already a lot more evidence than it was against Mark Pearson.
For sure. And in the case of Mark Pearson, of course, CCTV footage made it perfectly clear that, had he been Superman, he couldn't have done that impossible act that he was charged with. It was basically the state terrorizing a man. I mean,
yep.
That.
Right. Then thank you for joining our show, Mike. We need to go on with the rest of the news section. We have quite a lengthy news section. Thanks a lot for coming, and good luck with finding a new venue in London. And once you got that, maybe we can have you back for a longer period of time to explain us how to get there.
I look forward to that.
Meanwhile, please say the website again is icmi18.wordpress.com.
That's right.
Right. That's where you can get.
So you can see all the speakers there.
Yeah, that's where you get all the speakers and also the new all the news concerning the upcoming conference. I see the last article is about new venue being sought in London, so I presume that's where the news will be posted once you do find.
Indeed. So if people enter their email addresses and subscribe, they'll know what's happening about the conference as soon as anyone.
Right. Okay. Then thanks a lot for joining our show, and we're moving slowly to towards the next segment of the show. Thanks a lot again, Mike.
Thanks, Lucian. Take care now.
Right. Jon?
Okay. Our first piece of news comes from the Daily Mail from the UK. She laughed and just threw it. Acid attack victim who took 15 months to die in agony tells murder trial from beyond the grave how his ex-lover, 48, maimed him so no one else could have him. The victim of an acid attack gave evidence from beyond the grave in a groundbreaking murder trial today, telling how his ex-girlfriend laughed before dousing him in a corrosive liquid. Mark van Dongen, 29, was paralyzed from the neck down, suffered extensive burns, had his left leg amputated, and struggled to speak after the attack by Belinda Wallace, 48, in Bristol. Prosecutors say that despite the victim having later died at a euthanasia clinic in Belgium, the acid attack led directly to his death and charged Wallace with murder. As part of the evidence in a highly unusual trial today, the jury was shown footage of Mark being interviewed by police before his death. Describing the attack, he told a British detective, "She woke me up and said that if I can't have you, no one can." And she laughed and just threw the acid. It was a square box of acid with about an inch of acid in it. I only went back because I felt sorry for her. Mr. van Dongen was seen running from his home, screaming in agony after the alleged attack in September of 2015. He was horrifically scarred and spent 14 months on a ventilator in Bristol's Southmead Hospital before he was moved to Belgium, where 3 doctors agreed his pain was unbearable, and he died in a euthanasia clinic near his father's home on January the 2nd. Footage of the interview with the victim, shown at Bristol Crown Court today, showed Mark lying in a hospital bed with his face and chest severely burnt and disfigured. He told the officer, "I was running my boxer shorts. They fell off because the acid eating away. And then I met my upstairs neighbor and she took me in her house and got the police." When asked if he knew where Wallace had gotten the acid from, Mark said, "No, she bought it online, I heard. That's what I heard." He described the container as a Tupperware box filled with an inch of liquid. Asked if he knew why Wallace did it, Mark said, "Yes, because she was jealous, because I left her a month before this happened. I promised to pay money into her account until she finished university. I made first payment of £750 into her account and was still paying £250 a week after that. And I didn't even need to do that because we weren't married. That was pure goodwill, and now she chooses to do this." In the weeks before the attack, Wallace carried out internet searches including "Can I die from drinking sulfuric acid?" and searched for graphic images of acid attack victims the court heard. Fashion student Wallace denied murder and applying a corrosive fluid after pouring acid over Mark van Dongen at 3 a.m. on September 23rd, 2015. Describing the attack, Adam Weitlingan, QC, prosecuting, said, "The defendant had bought a bottle of sulfuric acid, which she bought online from Amazon. At around 3 a.m., as Mark was sleeping in bed, she poured the acid into a glass. She then went to the bedroom and woke him up. She laughed and said, 'If I can't have you, no one will.' And she threw the glass of sulfuric acid into his face. It covered his face and parts of his upper body and dripped onto his lower body as he moved. Covered in burning acid, Mark ran out into the street in his boxer shorts, screaming for help. The court heard the couple had a 5-year relationship and lived together, but it hit the rocks when Mark began seeing another woman in August of 2015. Shortly before his death, Mark, a Dutch national, told colleagues that Wallace had been violent towards him and, quote, seemed genuinely scared. Skipping a bit here, the couple appeared to rekindle their romance, exchanging love messages, promising to try to make the relationship work again on September 22nd, the day before the attack. The couple planned to cook dinner together when Mark returned to work, but that evening he went out to see his new girlfriend, Violet Farquharson, the court heard. The pair argued when he returned to Wallace's flat in Bristol at 10 p.m. and she told him she would stay in a hotel that night, the court heard. But at 3 a.m., Wallace returned to the flat and tossed a glass of acid over Mark, who was lying in bed wearing just his boxer shorts, it is alleged. Mark was kept in an isolated ward in ICU for 6 months before being moved to a burns ward, spending a total of 14 months at Southmead. The burns covered 25% of his body and skin had to be surgically removed. Mark's left leg was amputated below the knee and he lost his vision in his left eye and was partially sighted in his right eye. He eventually regained speech but was permanently paralyzed from the neck down. Mark fell into a depression, and Mr. Weltingham said, sometimes he said he wanted to live, at other times he wanted to die. On the 22nd of November 2016, a care home in Gloucester was found, and was understood that Mark would require a, quote, lifetime of constant and dedicated care. He told his father he wanted to return to Belgium, and his father hired an ambulance to take him to the Maria Hospital in Overpelt. The doctors here confirmed he was paralyzed for life and taking maximum doses of pain relief. He applied for euthanasia, and which was approved after 3 consultants examined him. It was decided this was a case of unbearable physical and psychological suffering, and Mark's life was taken on January 2nd, 2017. The court heard both Wallace and Mark were HIV positive and had been together for 5 years. Richard Smith, QC, defending, said Wallace claimed it was Mark who put the acid in the glass and urged her to drink it, and that she never left the flat that evening. Mrs. Smith said, it's a Belinda Wallace case that has that evening, as he had done often before, Mark had encouraged her to consider drinking the sulfuric acid they had bought for cleaning the drains. The trial continues.
This is really horror.
Yeah.
Holy shit. I mean, it's really sad all around. I mean, they're both HIV positive. She probably suffers from at least NPD, probably some other personality disorder as well. He probably wasn't, what's the political term, neurotypical either. I mean, it's really just a sad story all around. I mean, it is.
Yeah, really bizarre case and
very bizarre. What I don't find, and I know this isn't popular to say, but what I do find it a little bit odd is how much of this acid attack thing suddenly became a thing in the United Kingdom. And it happened really fast. I mean, over the course of the last several years. I mean, we've been doing this show since 2013. I mean, I've been doing this show, but you've been a caller before. Do you remember when we covered horrific murders or severe cases of domestic violence, acid attacks in 2013, 2014? Not really.
No, not in the UK. I mean, that was sort of a thing that we knew existed in various Middle Eastern countries, but in the UK, not really.
Yeah, in Middle East and maybe India, maybe Pakistan, but not in the United Kingdom, not in Europe in general. I mean, there have been several cases in the UK, several cases in Italy. Culturalism works. With all due respect for the family of the victim and whatnot, but this is really bizarre, and this is what worries me a lot more than the case per se. This trend of importing all sorts of barbaric methods that simply didn't exist, were nowhere. Well, I can say that they didn't exist because there aren't cases of historical acid attacks in Europe either, in the UK or in Europe in general.
So it's basically an actually harmful example of cultural appropriation.
Yeah. Now, cultural appropriation aside, I would be quite surprised if the perpetrator in this case will get convicted, especially of murder. I'm not convinced by the prosecutor's argument that it is murder. Grievous bodily harm for sure. Murder, at the end of the day, the victim did not die. The victim chose to be killed, essentially, to be euthanized. But the argument that, well, essentially her actions led to his death, no, not really. His conscious decision led to his death.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's just not murder.
Yeah, it's a very thin argument, and it is surprising to me that the Crown Prosecution Service is going for the murder charge. If I were to be more conspiratorial minded, which I'm not, I would even go as far as to suspect that maybe they want the case to be dismissed. I mean, it's just not murder. I'm sorry.
I know. Maybe in cases where you drive someone to suicide that could be considered
Yes.
some sort of form of manslaughter, something like that, or some sort of lesser degree murder. I don't know. But I don't know what the British law is on that. So
Yeah, but in general, driving someone to suicide is somewhat considered. But then again, in this case, the victim committed suicide legally in another country 1.5 years after the event. It's kind of hard to make that case. I mean, if it had happened soon after the event, and by soon, I guess any reasonable person understands to be within 3 months or something, maybe. But 1.5 years, I don't know. Besides, if I were her lawyer, I would argue that, hold on a second, maybe the effects were much severer than they should have been because of the fact that the victim did not have an immune system, because that's what being HIV positive essentially means. And that's definitely not the fault of the perpetrator. So, in any way, I think it is poorly prosecuted. That's what I'm trying to say here.
yeah, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, and so I can't don't have any sort of expert opinion on this, but at least from my layman's point of view, it does seem a bit strange that they're judging him with murder or her with murder.
Yeah. Nevertheless, I do hope she's found guilty of at least grievous bodily harm, and as Mike told us in the previous segment, that in itself is a crime that carries a maximum amount of life imprisonment. Now, I think she won't get life imprisonment, but I hope they do pass some custodial sentence on her.
Yep.
Right. Okay, let's go to the next story if I can find it. All right. The next story is really interesting, and it's a story that it was love at first sight when you sent me the link. I was like, I love this story. Coming from the Daily Mail, but it's about the Netherlands. Outrage over raped or not Dutch TV show, which asks panel of 14 youths to judge whether sex attack victims were actually assaulted. A Dutch TV channel is launching a controversial new show where young people discuss whether or not rape took place in fictional sexual assaults based on real-life cases. As part of the show called Raped or Not, young men and women then discuss if they agree or not with the outcome of a subsequent trial. The show has, unsurprisingly, caused outrage in the Netherlands, with critics calling it bizarre and arguing that you cannot have an opinion on rape. Those critics should be, of course, thrown off helicopters. Producers have hit back, saying that it is important to discuss what is and isn't assault, in particular on the back of the Me Too social media campaign and the Weinstein scandal. We'll talk about that later on in the show. The first episode shows a former couple who end up in bed together after a party and end up having sex, even though it is not clear if both consented. Another sees a young man who has just started as an intern with a female boss, where she seduces him during the after-work drinks. Producer Bernard van der Bosch said, quote, "First, everyone raised their eyebrows. Now everyone says, what a timing." According to van den Bosch, most of the outrage is due to the in-your-face title of the show, but that recent sex scandals, such as the accusations against Harvey Weinstein, has shown that the topic has much more nuance. Van den Bosch said, quote, "Those are personal dramas. One says rape, the other sees it as an innocent sexual encounter. Our show is about that gray area." The TV show's host, Geraldine Kemper, said, sorry, I guess if it's in the Netherlands, it would be Geraldine Kemper, said that the cases discussed in Raped or Not are not cases in which someone is dragged into the bushes and raped. She said, quote, "There is no discussion about whether or not that is rape, but in many situations, it is much murkier." Kemper said that when she saw the first images of some cases, she was not sure if she would call those incidents rape. Kemper also said, quote, "But by having a discussion together, our ideas about it can change. That is what we want to reach with this program," close quote. Great, in a way, I think.
Yeah, it's a very interesting concept. It's certainly risque, but I think it's a great idea.
Well, progress in any field, including social science, hasn't been achieved without someone being a little bit risque. And if you want to change, shift, or perhaps hopefully expand the Overton window on this topic, someone needs to take a stab at it. And it is highly appropriate that it's happening in the Netherlands. It would have been far worse if it had happened in an Anglo country. Because as we discussed several times in several shows already, the Netherlands is a much more sexually tolerant country than the more northern ones, particularly the United Kingdom or Sweden. In the Netherlands, it is the public is already accustomed to the kind of sexual habits that would be considered horrifying or even downright abuse in more Anglo countries or in Sweden. So it is in a way the appropriate country to at least attempt this concept.
Yeah, and I mean they are asking interesting and important questions, because this whole narrative that there is no gray area, that it's all very clear cut, and that we need to have affirmative consent, otherwise rape is just nonsense. It just ignores important realities about how human beings interact with each other when it comes to sex. It's very clear that there are gray areas. Because not every sexual encounter begins with one person sort of laying out exactly a list of things I would like to do, and can I put my hand there and my other parts there, and so on.
Only people who've never had sex think like that. I mean,
I'm pretty sure that not even anyone over the age of, I don't know, 10 or something thinks that sex works like that.
Yeah, especially not in the current year where access to porn is pretty easy. Yeah, but even in the 50s, I don't think anyone actually thought that.
This is like the opinion on human sex you would expect from the sort of extraterrestrial life form that just sort of read about human civilization or like had some sort of maybe some sort of a school course on human civilization, and then based on that formed opinions about how humans should conduct their sex life, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, a school course taught by Andrea Dworkin.
Yeah, maybe that.
And that's the only thing they ever heard about the human civilization, the Andrea Dworkin perspective. Yeah, it is a good idea. I agree that it is a little bit risque because it could go the full feminist route, although I suspect it won't, which is why I said it is the appropriate country, because the Netherlands is not a militant feminist country. Let's not forget, the Netherlands is one of the few countries in Europe that has domestic violence shelters for men, that has it's one of the few countries where the narrative of toxic masculinity simply did not work. It was utterly rejected even by the teachers. I mean, several militant feminists tried to infiltrate the Ministry of Education, tried to get that into the schools, and the Union of Teachers were like, no, we're not going to teach that to our pupils. That's insane. And some more younger professors were like, come on, we have vending machines with condoms for 14-year-olds in our schools, and you want to teach them about toxic masculinity? No, you're all insane. So it is the appropriate country to at least attempt and test this kind of concept. Now, admittedly, this is happening in the Netherlands for another reason too, namely that the Netherlands has been the home of several production houses that have created show formats that became global successes. So Big Brother, for instance, is a Dutch concept, and there are several others that have become global successes that were created by Dutch companies. So it is a concerted, no, not a concerted. It's a conglomerate of coincidences that make this show happen in the Netherlands and not anywhere else.
Yep.
Right. I wish them success with good luck with their show. I hope I'll find some subtitled versions of some of the episodes, because I'm really looking forward to watch it. I'm gonna browse the torrents soon enough.
Okay, let's go to the next
one.
piece, which is from Corner from Austria. Quote: "Women have frequently offered my husband blowjobs. With her post on the hashtag #MeToo debate, which was triggered by the scandal surrounding Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein, Nina Poll made waves in Austria over the last few days. On the Ö3 show, Frühstück bei mir, which is breakfast at my place, the actress doubled down. According to her, the victims of sexual violence aren't just women, but also men, such as her own husband, Gregor Bloeb. However, she still couldn't understand the public hysteria surrounding the topic. Under the hashtag #MeToo, women around the world report their experiences of sexual transgressions at the hands of men. A few days ago, Nina Proll also commented on this sexism debate, but used the hashtag #NotMe. On Claudia Stöckel's show, the actress doubled down again as she did not want to back down from her opinion, in spite of criticism from fellow actresses such as Ursula Strauss or ORF anchorman Armin Wolf. And ORF is the state television in Austria. Paul poured even more oil into the fire. She said she did not recognize the widespread view of the balance of power between men and women. Quote, I know all these actresses who run around these award ceremonies, these galas and events, shoving their boobs under the noses of every producer in sight, sitting on their laps and then claiming afterwards that they were sexually molested. I know all these colleagues who are posting hashtag #MeToo now. I know how they throw themselves at producers. Paul said that women frequently like to portray themselves as being superior beings, but she knows from her own experience that men also sometimes get indecent proposals. Quote, at many events, my husband has been asked whether he would like a blowjob, and it's fine, they can try their luck, but then kindly refrain from posting me too. I can't take that. She continues, I also see my husband as a victim of sexual violence, so I always ask him, why don't you post under hashtag me too? After all, he's had to endure times, he had to endure many times as much as me. She doesn't deny that actors in the industry are confronted with cases like Harvey Weinstein. However, quote, if a producer makes sex a condition of giving a particular role to an actress, that's boorish behavior and he's an idiot, but it's not a criminal act. If someone like that ever were to happen to her, she would, quote, not want to work with such a person for my own sake, so would choose to forgo the role. That's why she saw the sexism debate as being more than exaggerated. Quote, I'm sick and tired of this collective whinging that has emerged from the Me Too debate. She believes that men are currently under general suspicion of being sexists. This is why she emphatically reiterated, if women who complained about compliments label themselves as victims of sexual harassment, I'm out. If sexual attraction between man and woman can no longer be articulated, then any form of art, any humor, and any playfulness between the sexes will die.
I already like this lady. She's such a winning. Yeah, this article and the next 3 or 4, well, except the next one, but the other, that's why I gave this title, Question All of Me Too. Because it seems that the more time goes on, the more slowly but consistently you have more voices criticizing it. If we had that politician in Sweden, we have now we have this actress. There have been several other actors in various places who are like, hold on a second, maybe things aren't that way. Maybe, just maybe, some of you are full of shit.
Yeah.
And they are, of course, full of shit. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it is sort of in large part a sort of symbiotic relationship between those actresses who use their sexuality to get roles, to advance their careers, and the kinds of men who take advantage of that. Mm-hmm. And just to put all the blame on the men is just unfair and unreasonable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is unreasonable, and as this actress says correctly, hold on a second. If someone says, well, if you don't stick around for a pumping or two, then you won't get the role. Yeah, that's being an asshole, but it's not a crime. And I mean, in most countries, it's definitely not a crime. I guess you could argue it's blackmail, but then again, you don't have an unalienable right to getting a role in a movie. So, you know, it is being an asshole, but it's not a crime. And If you don't like it, then don't stick around for a pumping or two, and you don't get the role, and that's fine. The world continues to spin. Nothing of value is necessarily being lost.
Yeah, and I mean I guess it's kind of unfair that you don't get a role, even
Yes,
if you
life is unfair.
qualified for it. But I mean, particularly when it comes to selecting actors for film, all these decisions are going to be to a large degree arbitrary, and there's a lot of discretion for the people involved. And because it's not like there's some sort of objective standard of good acting.
Yes.
There's so many subjective factors in there that you're always going to get problems like these, and it's not a good thing, but it's not the end of the world if someone makes some sort of indecent proposal like that to you.
Yes, and again, life is unfair. I mean, you don't get everything you want in life. I think anyone who has grown beyond the age of 12 has realized that already, and if they haven't, that's their problem. I mean, life is unfair. And I'm sorry, but as much as I love the arts, I don't think the whole planet is going to collapse if, I don't know, Uma Thurman doesn't get a particular role in a particular movie. Heck, the movie doesn't exist yet, so we don't even know what we're losing. So we're not necessarily worse off. Okay, nothing against Uma Thurman, but you get the point. So yeah, I mean, she definitely has a point, and it's definitely exaggerated. And I like it that she maintains this balance. Look, my husband has been proposed random blowjobs, and he doesn't consider himself a victim, and because he's not, and the same thing, you all lot there who complain about the same thing, you're not victims either. I like it that she maintains this balance instead of going full identity politics for men, which is great.
Yep.
I mean, this is precisely the kind of people we need. Because the last thing I need is for someone to actually take meninism seriously. Because yeah, I mean, the less identity politics we have, the better off we are. And again, we'll talk about Harvey Weinstein later in the show, because even there, it's not as clear cut as people think. Yes, he's an asshole, but is he a mass rapist? Not really. Debatable at the very least. At the very least. Right. Let's go to the next one, because I'll have some questions for that, and you're the only one I know that I can ask.
And now for something completely different, coming from businessinsider.com, but it's about Germany. Germany is set to become first European country to recognize a third gender by law. After California recently passed legislation to officially recognize a third gender, courts in Germany have ruled to do the same. A ruling from Germany's Federal Constitutional Court determined that legislators must recognize a third gender designation at birth. Only allowing for male and female options violates Germany's federal ban on discrimination, the court decided, and is therefore unconstitutional. The ruling came from a 2013 case brought forward by an intersex person who wanted to be recognized as such in the country's registry of birth. In 2013, the country had decided to allow them the option to leave gender blank in the registry, but the court ruled that this was not sufficient. Lawmakers now have until the end of December 2018 to enact the new legislation. Potential new options for the birth registry are to designate intersex or diverse as options, or to remove gender entries altogether. Legislators expressed favorable views on the court's ruling. Quote, "We fully respect the decision of the Federal Constitutional Court, and the government is fully willing to implement the decision," Johannes Dimroth, spokesman for Germany's Interior Ministry, told CNN. While the ruling and forthcoming legislation only affects those born intersex, advocates hope that this will lead to greater challenging of the gender binary in Germany. Quote, "This judgment is a very important step for intersex people in Germany. We hope it can lead to a rethink in society, to a realization that there are more than two genders." Maya Liebing, an expert in LGBTI rights at Amnesty International in Germany, told CNN. The ruling, which was originally passed on October the 10th, was fittingly made public on Intersex Day of Solidarity.
At the first glance, it sounds like horror, full degeneracy. What the fuck is going on? Please explain, Jon.
So this is not about transgender people. This is about intersex people. So people are born intersex at birth, which is an actual thing.
It's a disorder and it exists. Yes.
and with the effects, I don't know, there's different numbers, but some sort of fraction of 1% probably.
Yes.
So people born with an unclear set of genitalia and so on. And I guess I don't really have a problem with that.
Well, I do. And the reason I do is not, the issue is never the issue. That's you have to think in leftist terms to understand why this is a problem. Yeah, sure. Why? Well, fair enough. I mean, let's say there are 100,000 births each year in Germany. Probably there are more than that, but let's put 100,000. And I don't know, 500 of those 100,000 maybe fit into this category, whatnot. Okay, fair enough. It's really not a big issue. But then you read this particular paragraph. While the ruling and forthcoming legislation only affects those born intersex, advocates hope that this will lead to greater challenging of the gender binary in Germany. This is why I find problematic, because you give these people an inch and they'll take the entire hand. Or as we say here, those of us who've been raped by Russia quite a lot, you give a small piece of the nose to Ivan and he'll climb up the whole bed. This is why I find it a big issue and the problem, because it gives ammunition to these disdainful fucktards who, quite frankly, don't belong in this civilization. I mean, the worst part is there. Maya Liebing, an expert in LGBTI rights at Amnesty International, told CNN, all of those people should be helicoptered. I mean, CNN, Amnesty International, Maya Liebing, you all should just go away. Go away. I don't know, move to Greenland or something. Get a place of your own and leave us, the rest of us normal people, alone, please.
I don't know. That just seems sort of a fully general argument against basically any kind of legislation, because you can always say, if we take this even further, then it's going to lead to bad results. You can make the same argument, say, against decriminalizing sex between men. Because then you can say, well, if gay people can have sex, then soon enough you're going to have, sex with children and necrophilia and everything else. But that didn't actually happen.
Well, it might happen in Sweden, so there's that. I mean, that's what I'm trying to say. That from some point on, the slippery slope may indeed be real. And besides, sex between men has... I mean, for the most part of human history, wasn't a crime. So, at the end of the day, it's a traditional argument to say, no, sex between men should be legal, because traditionally it has been. It's the historical exception to have it criminalized, not the historical norm.
Yeah, however, but it was criminal for several centuries in Germany, so...
Yes. Yep, several centuries, but over the course of human history, or even of the German tribes, not really. Not really. See where I'm going with this? I mean, historically speaking, over the course of a wider course of history, it hasn't been the norm, and it isn't the norm, and it shouldn't be the norm. But with these kinds of things, and again, it's not particularly about the issue is never the issue. It's not particularly about the intersex people. It's really quite a small thing. But when you put it, I guess I'm going to sound like a progressive here, but when you put it on a continuum, you give a lot of ammunition to very, very odious people. And the existence of intersex people has been consistently used as a way in for the people we both despise, the tranny advocates. There's a difference between actual trannies and the tranny advocates. The first category of people are a category of people worthy of our compassion. The latter, they're not.
Yeah, but I mean, that's just a really dangerous argument, I think.
I'm not saying it's an easy argument.
Yeah, but so you're saying that because this change in law could possibly lead to some sort of undesirable changes in law in the future. We shouldn't do it. I'm sorry, but I can't go along with that. Even if it, I don't know, gives ammunition to the enemy or something like that. Intersex people are not my enemy, and
Yeah, sure.
recognizing them in law is, I don't see a problem with that.
Well, in addition to the potential ammunition to not just the enemy, to individuals who basically want to tear down everything everyone stands for. There is also the issue that intersex people have been around since there have been humans on Earth, and yet for some reason there was never the question of having these kinds of gimmicks in the law. And for some reason, in most places, they have lived a decent life anyway. So, to make the argument that just because one particular individual back in 2013 felt wrongly about the status quo once, then the law for everyone else in present and in the future needs to be changed. Are we really sure about that? Are we really sure?
It's not that I'm necessarily in favor of this change, but I just don't think it's a big deal.
Yeah, well, even though I don't think it's a big deal, I'm definitely not in favor of the change. I mean, the previous one mentioned in here says, "Oh, well, in cases of severe questions, we can just leave the sex, not the gender, the sex part in the birth certificate blank for to be filled out later on in life." Okay, fair enough. That's very. This is exactly how it was, and I think it's still being done now. Here, and it has been done this way since I think the 30s, when the first medical case of a hermaphrodite child being born. Why can't it stay that way? Why does it have to be, let's feel they're diverse? I mean, really? Why?
Yeah, I mean that diverse. That's stupid. I mean, it's not diverse. It's you have a term for that. It's intersex. It's used to call these people hermaphrodites. Now we call them intersex. That's fine, but you're not diverse just because you're.
This is already the first hint of the slippery slope. Now there's this ruling. Next, there will be diverse on birth certificates. That's already a politically loaded term, and that's basically putting politics in science. And I have a huge problem with that.
Yeah, but I think to a certain extent that's unavoidable.
It is in certain topics, but I think it can be avoided at least sometimes.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, if you're gonna say we just say that there's only male and female, and there's no option for intersex, that's also a political decision about science.
No, not really, because even with the intersex people, they still have a dominant characteristic, and if you try hard enough, I mean, there was recently a case of a dude in China who got himself to the hospital because of severe aches in his abdomen and whatnot, and it turned out that he was having uterine cysts. He was a man for all intents and purposes, but if he had been born in Germany, he would have been labeled intersex, but according to this particular ruling. I mean, in most cases, because let's put it this way, the majority of the tiny minority we're talking about, they're still essentially also men and women. So turning everything upside down for a very minuscule minority that usually finds private solutions to the issue already, and have been finding solutions to the issue already for centuries and millennia. It's just not a particularly sound decision.
But basically, you're not turning everything upside down. You're just adding an extra option on this little form where it says something like intersex instead of male or female. It's not turning anything upside down.
Wait for another 7 or 8 years until you'll find the tranny advocates in the schools and say, oh, because now we have allowed this, then we can go to the next step. You, history will prove me right on this. Sure, if we were in an academic debate competition, you would of course be entirely correct, and I would be forced to concede the argument. But we're not in an academic contest. This is what this is always my message with the people with pure logic. Life is not an academic debate contest. People are not logical. In real life, things do go a certain way, even if it is entirely illogical. Because of course, in a pure logic environment, it will be completely illogical to think that this will lead to a particular type of advocacy that will essentially turn everything upside down. Yes, it is illogical, of course, but it happens, and it has happened, and it will happen.
I mean, I certainly agree that people are very often illogical, but I don't even know if this change in law really helps the LGBTQW barbecue lobby.
It's the Q barbecue that it's the problem, not the LGB. Most lesbians, most gays, and most bisexuals are really, really normal and reasonable people, much to the horror of the far left. It's the Q barbecue part that is really an issue.
I mean, I think the problem is the cultural attitude towards towards these people, and I don't think that this change in law will change the cultural attitudes.
Yeah,
it's maybe a symptom of changing cultural attitudes, but this sort of minor change in the law is not going to. Well, I think it's unlikely that it's going to affect whether it's more likely that that we're going to have an extra 27 genders in 20 years or something like that.
I guess we'll have to wait and see on that.
Okay.
Which one of us is correct? What I do also worry, and then I'll go to the next story, I promise, is also the portion of many of these individuals who appeared intersex at birth ended up quite fast identifying with one sex or the other, even oftentimes before they hit puberty. So then they will have to work again through the bureaucracy to get that one changed, which might be harder. It creates a lot more problems than it solves. Leaving it blank, it appears to me, as a much more sound solution if it really comes to it.
Yeah, but I mean, you can change it from blank to either male or female. That's just as easy or hard as changing it from intersex to male or female.
I don't know the intricacies of the German bureaucracy. You might be correct, but from my perspective, it's a lot easier to just add something where it was left blank than to actively change from one thing to another. But I guess from a bureaucratic,
it's not like like they're going to take some sort of certificate and like handwrite in some sort of new sex. I mean, they're going to this stuff exists electronically now. Just going to print out a new thing and just change a line in some sort of database.
Yeah, sure. But procedurally speaking, at least here they're a different thing. It's one thing to want to add something, and a whole different thing to change something that has already been written. So I guess it's an entirely bureaucratic point. I'm not getting into that.
Yeah,
right.
I'm not an expert on German bureaucracy either, but I would assume
okay.
Make a difference.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough.
Let's move on.
Coming from The Guardian, revealed water is wet. Male rape used systematically in Libya as an instrument of war. Male rape is being used systematically in Libya as an instrument of war and political domination by rival factions, according to multiple testimonies gathered by investigators. Years of work by a Tunis-based group and witnessed by a journalist from Le Monde have produced harrowing reports from victims and video footage showing men being sodomized by various objects, including rockets and broom handles. In several instances, witnesses say a victim was thrown into a room with other prisoners who were ordered to rape him or be killed. The atrocities being perpetrated to humiliate and neutralize opponents in the lawless militia-dominated country. Male rape is such a taboo in Arab societies that the abused generally feel too damaged to rejoin political, military, or civic life. One man, Ahmed, told investigators he was detained for 4 years in a prison in Tomina on the outskirts of Misrata. They separate you to subjugate you, he said. Subjugate the men. That's the expression that they use, so that you never hold your head up again. And they were filming everything with their phones. They take a broom and fix it on the wall. If you want to eat, you have to take off your pants, back onto the broom, and not move off until the jailer sees blood flowing. Nobody can escape it. Ahmed said 450 men were being held in his part of the jail. There was a black man, a migrant, in the evening. They threw him into one of our cells and said, "You raped this guy, otherwise you're dead." The Gaddafi regime was accused of using rape as an instrument of war during the 2011 revolution that unseated the dictator. Until now, there has been no conclusive proof. Gaddafi loyalists raped during the revolution, said one of the Tunis-based exiled Libyans who wishes to be known only as Ramadan for security reasons. Once they were defeated, they suffered the same violence. The hub of the investigation is a small office in Tunis where Ramadan and his chief collaborator, a large man called Imed, have spent 3 years collating evidence. In one video shown to this reporter, a young man is seen sitting in the sand with his head down, terrified. An arm in a military outfit lifts him up, pulls down his trousers, then his pants, and places a rocket launcher up his buttocks. The camera turns away. Ramadan turns away and says, "Stop it, it's sadistic." The video cannot be independently verified, and it's impossible to identify the militia group where the rape took place, which is a very good mention. I wish they would mention this every time. Imed traveled to Libya with this reporter this year to gather testimony. In southern Tripoli, he met a colleague, Muna, who has documented dozens of cases. In one case, a former soldier loyal to Muammar al-Gaddafi said he was raped repeatedly. With a broom handle fixed to a wall, Imed asked. Moana nodded. They were all raped like this. Further evidence emerged from a group of associates based in a small building near Tripoli. They handed Imed 650 files arranged in alphabetical order. Many contained rape allegations made by people from Tewerha, a black African tribe accused of once supporting Gaddafi and of raping their enemies during the revolution. They faced a terrible revenge. Their city, Tewerha, was razed and 35,000 inhabitants were scattered to several camps for internally displaced people in Benghazi and Tripoli. In one camp south of Tripoli, a man called Ali recounted his experience. He was 39 but looked 65 and walked with a cane. "Some of us were locked in a room, naked, for a whole night with groups of migrants," he said. "The guards did not release them until they had all raped each other. Fortunately, I didn't go through that. I only got the stick and the wheel. The wheel involved being put naked on a folded double through a tire suspended from the ceiling, making it easier for torturers to penetrate him with weaponry." Ali said he now had physical problems. Leaks, as he called them. In another camp in southern Tripoli, Fathia said women were not immune. She said her entire family was violated by a militia from Misrata, with the men being deliberately targeted. "They dragged me in the street in front of everyone, saying, 'You raped our girls, we'll do the same thing to you.' The worst thing they did to me," she whispered, "is to rape me in front of my eldest son. Since then, he won't speak to me." Asked about other inmates who suffered a similar ordeal, Fathia said, "I only heard men's voices. They were screaming day and night." Last year, the International Criminal Court prosecutor Fatou Bensouda asked the United Nations Security Council for more funds to strengthen and expand her investigations into Libyan war crimes. On August the 15th, the ICC issued an international arrest warrant for Qadr Mahmoud al-Verfali, a general accused of war crimes who is allied to Khalifa Haftar, the man who has controlled eastern Libya for years. For the first time, videos posted on the internet showing summary executions allegedly committed by Verfali have been admitted by the International Criminal Court as evidence. In Tunis, the investigations were buoyed by this development. They now know their video testimonies will be legally valid if war crime cases are brought against the perpetrators of the systematic rape. They also suspect more victims to come forward from clandestine jails in eastern Libya. Horror.
Yeah.
It is really horror. to their credit, I mean, as much as I like to bash the Guardian, and I will continue to bash them anyway, to their credit, they're usually the only mainstream outlet, at least in the English language. The French are a little bit more open about this, but in the English language, they're the only mainstream outlet that do emphasize these cases from at least from time to time. Probably not often enough, in my opinion, but definitely they do it a lot more often than probably any other mainstream outlet.
Yeah, and it's very important to mention these kinds of cases because all too often the narrative is that about rape, of course, that it's just about women being raped, which of course also happens as a weapon of war. But you know, at least what it says in this case is that at least there in Libya,
it is mostly men.
Yeah, it's mostly men. It's this woman says, you know, the women were also raped. That's and that sort of clearly implies that this is the less usual case. This is the exception.
Yeah, and even one of the victims of these alleged crimes says, "Well, I was raped in front of my son, but by and large, I heard only men's voices screaming and harrowing and whatnot." So, if we are to believe this, and again, many of these things are alleged, although I suspect the videos could not necessarily be so easily forged. So at least some of these claims must be at least in part true. And even though I don't like to praise the Guardian, I really need to emphasize, because from them it was the first time I learned that at least in Africa, when it comes to war, when it comes to rape being used as a weapon of war, it is overwhelmingly, not just primarily, but overwhelmingly men who fall victim of this. The article I'm talking about is one written about 4 years ago called "The Rape of Men," and it's about rape as a weapon of war used in several smaller or bigger scale wars all over Africa in the last 15 or 20 years. If it hadn't been for the Guardian, I would have had no idea about this. I mean, it is remarkably common. And it is remarkably the one way that the United Nations generally tends to ignore. Yeah,
and it's quite tragic, really, because I mean, if you look at these kinds of societies, men who've been raped are considered, they're considered unmanly. They're considered they're basically considered broken.
Similarly to women, actually. I mean, women who have been raped.
Yeah, similar to women. And it's really horrific. And I don't really know what can be done about that. Maybe maybe sort of at least part of the problem is
definitely the culture.
It's definitely the culture. It's definitely sort of the way that sex is seen as polluting, as and particularly because of the attitude towards homosexuality as something that's an abomination. That's something that's dishonorable. That particular to the party being penetrated. That makes it a lot worse. I mean, if you had these rapes in somewhere in Europe, then of course would also be quite traumatic and horrible, but wouldn't be quite as bad, because we understand that if you were the victim of rape, then you get sympathy, you get
and even if you don't get sympathy, you don't get considered broken for the rest of your life. You just don't. Well, unless you're a feminist, because this is another reason we oppose feminism, or at least I oppose feminists, is because they think rape victims are broken for the rest of their lives, pretty much just like Islamic culture. Whereas whereas the rest of us, more mentally sane, we think no, there is such thing as survivors of rape. You move over it eventually, and the perpetual victimization is not encouraged, which is good.
It's this whole attitude of rape is even worse than murder. It's nothing worse than rape, and it's such nonsense. And it's not just a new like feminist concept. It's also something that
Yes.
that existed, back in classical antiquity. We have um, this is a classical story in the Roman founding myth of the Republic. You have the rape of Lucretia, who then kills herself, and that's sort of considered the honorable thing to do if you've been raped. Because then you've
Sure.
been polluted, your life is basically worthless. That's um, and even if like if then your father kills you after you've been raped, that's sort of a kind of mercy killing.
Sure. Well, feminism most of the time is not a new idea. It's just the amplification of previously existent bad ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, horrible. I guess the only good news in this is that the International Criminal Court is now admitting the evidence that these people are gathering. They're admitting it as evidence in a probably a subsequent big war crime trial, which will probably take place maybe 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years from now. So there is a slightly small step forward towards justice, which is probably the only good thing that we can take out from this story.
Yeah.
Right. Speaking of Arab things, let's go to the next one.
Okay, the next one is
I put this one. I'm sorry for interrupting. We put this one with the story in Libya, and then now we get back to our Western culture. Just look how trivial things are here in comparison with the rest of the world. Please go ahead.
Okay, from the Mail on Sunday, written by Peter Hitchens. What will women gain from all this squawking about sex pests? A niqab. Behold my proposed new autumn look for women in politics. And next to that, there's a photo of a woman in a niqab. The black, I think, is flattering, and it radiates an air of cool unapproachability. No minister would put his hand on the knee of anyone dressed like this. Indeed, he'd have trouble finding her knee or anything else. Well, isn't this what you want, all you squawking, flapping denouncers of groping men and inappropriate jokes? You have lots in common with militant Islamists on this subject. They, too, believe that all men must be assumed to be slavering predators. And these beliefs lie behind the severe dress codes and sexual segregation which modern liberals claim to find so shocking about Islam. Yet on this, it turns out that you agree with them. Any male action, any form of words you choose to disapprove of can and will be presumed to be guilty because, well, men are like that. The culprit will be ruined forever. Are you all off your heads? Do you have no sense of proportion? The country is in the midst of its biggest constitutional crisis for a century and wobbling on the precipice of bankruptcy. The welfare system is about to melt down, and you think the most important thing in your lives is a hunt for long-ago cases of wandering hands or tellers of coarse jokes? Yes, you do. You've lost all touch with reality, and future generations will laugh at you. Alas, you are in charge now. Take this, for example. Michael Fallon was one of the worst defense secretaries in history. The army is a skeleton, the navy dead in the water, largely motionless and stripped of its most basic capacities. The former head of the Navy, Lord West, is reduced to writing to the newspapers to try to point out the dangers because nobody will listen. But was Mr. Fallon made to quit over that? No. Neither the political class nor their pals in the media class care about such things. He was driven from office because he is alleged not to be safe in mixed company. In a way that is very old-fashioned. Personally, I'm a Victorian prude, though I try to keep it under control. I'm still secretly shocked by coarse words, especially used in front of women or children. I'm dismayed to see on public display on TV and in the streets, in normal conversations, things and events which would once have been available to shamefully seedy men in shady backstreet shops. I don't want to watch other people having sex. I also experienced the 1960s and their aftermath and saw the dreadful, often tragic things that happened when men and women abandoned the old rules of fidelity and constancy and wrongly imagined that total freedom leads to total happiness. Since then, I haven't been able to see why the wonderful new equality between men and women, which is one of the great changes for the better in our age, had to be mixed up with the militant destruction of marriage and the traditional family. I still don't. But many of those who claim to seek female equality have another, much fiercer objective. They actually see men as the enemy, the patriarchy, to be overthrown by all means necessary and replaced by a feminized society. They also see marriage as a machine for oppressing women. The objective moved a lot closer last week. This is why many of those who said they wanted equality also sneered at restraint and manners. They claimed now they want the restraint and the manners back, though the suspicion lingers that much of the current fusses aim mainly at making all men look wicked and grubby. But where are such restrained manners to come from in our liberated society? They were part of an elaborate code of courtship and respect which was learned by example in the married family and has now completely vanished. In our post-marriage free-for-all, why should we expect either sex to be restrained? All that's left is the police or the public pillory or Twitter. It was the old code which allowed us, unlike the Islamic world, to permit the happy mixing of men and women without black shrouds, veils, or no touching rules, so strict they even rule out of male-female handshake. Now it's gone. What are we to do instead? I am angered by the public denunciations now taking place, not because I believe or disbelieve them, how can we know, but because they make trust impossible. Andrea Leadsom, whose own bid for the Tory leadership was destroyed by what I still think was the unfair twisting of her words, should know better than to engage in such things. Wise men at Westminster will in future go about with chaperones, record and film all conversations with the opposite sex, require women to sign consent forms before meeting them, and certificates of good conduct afterwards. Nothing else will keep them safe from claims that they momentarily applied a fleeting hand to someone's knee. Or there's always the other solution, the niqab, the burqa, and the segregation of the sexes. But sanity, the best remedy of all, is obviously unlikely to return anytime in the near future.
Well, good luck arguing against his case.
Yeah.
I mean,
if you want to have men and women working together in the same companies, in similar positions, working as co-workers, as superiors, as inferiors, you have to be somewhat considerate of the idea that men and women might be sexually attracted to each other and they might want to express that in some way.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to happen. It's just a human biology.
Yeah, it is again this fundamental lack of understanding of human nature. It seems that many of these policies and many of these advocates say, "Oh, more sexual assault and whatnot." They seem to be people that never had sex, and
I mean, sure, there should of course be rules against actual sexual harassment, against actual sexual assault, but you also have to keep a sense of proportion. You can't just try to criminalize every normal piece of human interaction.
Yeah. 10 years ago, I would have agreed with you. Nowadays, I say no. The whole sexual harassment thing must go. There should be no rules against sexual harassment. Why? Because the modern culture has made everything to be sexual harassment. And when everything is sexual harassment, then nothing is sexual harassment. Sounds bad? Yes. Well, tough luck. I didn't make the rules. Sexual assault, fine. We at least still have some idea about what that is. But sexual harassment, no. I think all the rules about that should be abolished, because we no longer know what sexual harassment is. It has been extended to such thing that is literally everything. You looked the wrong way to a woman, that's sexual harassment by law in France today. You can go to jail for that. And the evidence for that, she says you looked and she felt unsafe. That's enough for a harassment conviction.
Yeah,
in these circumstances, I believe that the much more saner position is to just abolish all the sexual harassment rules and laws and policies and everything else. Let people learn once again on the playground where the limits are, because they obviously have forgotten. Now, Peter Hitchens says here what we've been saying for for years on this show, except he says that it is undoubtedly a bad thing, whereas we say, well, it doesn't matter whether it's a bad thing or not. It's just the wise thing to do. Where he says well, the paragraph before the last paragraph. Wise men at Westminster will in future go with chaperones, record and film all conversations with the opposite sex, require women to sign consent forms before meeting them, and certificates of good conduct afterwards. Nothing else will keep them safe for claims of applying a fleeting hand to someone's knee. Yeah, we've been promoting always be recording for years now. It sounds paranoid, and in some ways maybe it is, but we also have a say it's not paranoia when they're really after you.
Yeah, so back in the early 90s, Fry and Laurie, this comedian duo, had this sketch about a couple working out a pre-coital agreement with their lawyers present. Nowadays, that joke is no longer really funny because it's kind of getting to that being a reality.
And in some circumstances, in some countries, it might actually be the wisest thing to do. I mean, I may be joking about these things because I live in a country that is very, very far away, culturally speaking, from this insanity. But if I were to live in Sweden, I would consider this as very normal and a normal thing to do. Which is why there is, and I know many people will not believe me for this saying because well, it just sounds outrageous, but it is nonetheless true. A significant chunk of young men in Sweden, if they want to have sex, they just go outside of Sweden. They go to Denmark, they go to Germany, they go to Estonia, they go somewhere else. And many of them, they don't know how to explain when you ask them why. They don't know how to explain it. They're like, it's just better. It's my gut feeling tells me that it's just the better thing to do. So yeah, this is already happening. Of course, it's a very small scale for now. But then again, as you said, in the 90s, it wasn't entirely a joke. It was inconceivable. So there you go. Give it another 20 years at the current rate, and it will become a lot more normative.
Yeah.
Right. The last article is very long, and it's on the same topic that Peter Hitchens is talking about. So I'm going to read it in its entirety, and then hopefully we'll have enough time to comment on both articles, essentially. If not, James will forgive us for going 2 or 3 minutes over time. I know he will, although at first he will be angry. Coming from The Spectator, it's not victim shaming to suggest that there might be two sides to every story. When it comes to sexual politics, we need to question where the real power resides. It's a fantastic article, very long, but it's totally worth it. Somewhere towards the end of the 1980s, I was suddenly promoted 3 grades upwards in my job at the BBC, a bit like going from the middle of the old 4th division to the top of the championship. Yay! The immediate consequences were more money, more power, and almost endless opportunities for sexual intercourse. Women who had hitherto been averagely amiable, where colleagues became much friendlier and in a very different way. It was as if I'd been transformed overnight from Marty Feldman into Orlando Bloom. What a delightful period of my life that was. I was happily reminded of it when the actor Martin Clune stepped into the current sexual harassment debate, perhaps unwisely, suggesting that actresses flirted with producers in a most unseemly manner, which he likened to prostitution. Perhaps he is right, although I don't think so. I think a less contentious reading would be that women are hardwired to be attracted to powerful men. Or perhaps they have been schooled to be so by the inequalities in our society, although I doubt that. It seems to me utterly intrinsic. Back at the BBC, the average gap in grades between men and women who were in a relationship or shagging one another was about 3, and the male was always in the senior position. Female presenters did not do the cute researchers, even if he was the same age as them or older. Male presenters did the cute female researchers, and so on, all the way up the food chain. I'm not sure what light this sheds on the current situation, except to suggest gently that there might be, in some cases, 2 sides of the story. This is a dangerous thing to suggest because it leaves one open to the accusation of victim shaming. Indeed, so absolutist is it the screeching and the furor that any attempted caveat or any nervously muttered, but on the other hand, will incur a vilification every bit as extreme as if one had committed these acts of harassment oneself. Simply to hold such a thought would make one an abuse denier. A denier! Has any word been more traduced in our current century? I'm not denying that sexual harassment and worse has happened in Hollywood, in the BBC, in the Parliament, and probably in every office in the land, and that almost all cases in almost all cases it should be roundly condemned. Simply saying that at the milder end of the spectrum, what is today called harassment may once have been and might still be the way in which men and women relate to one another in the working environment. Given the long and proud march of women into employment since the early 70s, the workplace, rather than one's hometown or place of education, has become the arena in which we find our partners, assortative mating. The ladies flutter the eyelids, the gentlemen offer to buy them a drink or perhaps put an arm around the shoulder. Lord Reynard asking an inspiring young Lib Dem politician if she would like to join him for a coffee in his room. Harassment? I really don't think so. Somewhere towards the end of the 1980s, I was suddenly promoted 3 grades up. Oh, sorry. What the fuck? Oh, okay. Yeah. Take a look at the Harvey Weinstein case. He seems to me to be a repulsive, odious human being. One's sympathies are surely with the Italian actress Asia Argento, or on whom the gargantuan slob forcibly performed what the papers refer to as a sex act. And perhaps our sympathies should still be with her when we learn that she then went on to have a 5-year relationship with Weinstein, which involved quite a few more of those sex acts, I would guess. But should we not at least wonder a little at the real nature of their relationship? That all is not quite how it is presented to the press, that Mrs. Argento's anger has been somewhat slow to disclose itself. And so to Parliament. This one will run and run, I suspect. And in many cases, it is a good thing that arrogant and sexist male politicians get their comeuppance. I have to Google that one. If I were a woman, I would not like to be called sugar tits by Mark Garnier or to be dispatched by him to buy his dildos. It is true that cabinet ministers are very busy and may not have time themselves to nip out of the office in pursuit of dildos. One answer may be for the House of Commons souvenir shop to stock appropriately tasteful dildos imposed with the official portcullis trademark, alongside their awful boxes of chocolates and bottles of whiskey. Whatever. It is certainly boorish and arrogant behavior. But Michael Fallon putting his hand very briefly on the knee of the journalist and broadcaster Julia Hartley Brewer, an intrusion for which Fallon apologized once, he had received an earful from the excellent Hartley Brewer, and the two remain good friends. That was a front-page story. A hand on the knee. Okay, I would not do it. I don't think I've ever put my hand on a woman's knee, not even my wife's. There's something seedy and kind of Leslie Phillips about it. But should we get outraged about it? Meanwhile, there are also reports that a senior female Labour MP has been enjoying extramarital relationships with young male researchers. Ah, the exception that proves the rule. I was yet once a young Labour researcher and would have greatly appreciated a spot of cougaring from some benevolent female member. Although at the time I was there, my options would have been limited to Margaret Beckett and Judith Hart, so maybe not. But why should this mysterious politician be caught up in the hoo-ha? Isn't her alleged infidelity a matter for her and her husband? And did the researchers not enjoy their supposed liaisons? And in these transactions, where resided the power? Once you've asked that question and hazarded your way towards an answer, the whole basis for those outraged complaints begins to slowly unravel. All right, so we have enough time left. Go ahead.
Yeah, excellent article. It seems like a very reasonable take on the story. And yeah, sort of the confirming what we've always known about hypergamy, that the men were quite happy to go for women who were sort of a bit beneath them in the hierarchy, and women almost never do that. So that's just sort of confirming what we've already known. As for the actual sort of meat of the article, it's quite reasonable, and it just it sort of echoes what our Austrian actress said, that in a lot of these cases it's more of a mutually beneficial relationship, kind of, where sure, maybe some of these advances are unwanted, but then again, there's many of sexual advances that are wanted. And it's just unreasonable to just put it all on men being predatory.
Yeah. What I really don't appreciate about this whole Me Too brouhaha and all of these scandals in the parliament, in the BBC and whatnot, and in many other places, in many other countries, is that it comes off to me as, at best, a first world problem, and at worst as mostly nonsense. Because again, we read the story about the systemic rape in Libya, and then we go suddenly on the, oh, he put a hand on my knee. So what?
Yeah, and I mean, even the woman who got the hand put on her knees thinks it's not a big deal.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, it is. That's why I said it's at best a first world problem, and most of the time is not even that. It's very, and again, I don't like to use progressive language, but it's very privileged people complaining about issues that come with being a very privileged person. Because, you know, having someone randomly offer to randomly meeting you, offering to give you a blowjob, that's something that only very privileged people have this problem. Yeah. I mean, I'm pretty sure the overwhelming majority of men don't have this problem. Period. The same goes the other way around. I mean, a very powerful man wants to get some advances towards you, and you have the option to say yes or no. Well, first of all, you need to be very close to that privileged man. That means you are also working in a very privileged position in the parliament or in the BBC. Well, nowadays it's not really that much of a big of a deal, but in the 80s, getting a job at the BBC was in itself a hugely privileged position.
Yeah. Yes, so far, at least in my life, the number of women who approached me out of the blue and offered me blowjobs has been rather low. So
yeah,
I know about your experiences.
Yeah, it's probably around 0, isn't it? Well, actually, I would lie. It would be 1, but if I send you a picture of her, you'll understand. You know, it's pretty much like this guy, who apparently is a leftist, Labour. He says, he says that, well, my options would have been limited to Margaret Beckett and Judith Hart, so maybe not. That was precisely my reaction. I was like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe not. But no, in all seriousness, in both cases, whether the quote-unquote victim is male or female, it's usually very privileged people who should instead rather thank their lucky stars that this is really their biggest problem. Oh my God, someone is making advances towards me. So what? And again, this guy, the author of this article, damn, I haven't saved his name. But anyway, the author of this article from The Spectator, he has a point. He says, "No, hold on a second. The rape and the abuse thing, yeah, sure, that's bad. It should be broadly condemned. But on the milder end of the spectrum," and he doesn't mention, but he should, the milder end of the spectrum is actually the majority of the cases. Maybe a little bit more of a suck it up, buttercup attitude would be fantastic to approach.
Yeah, and it seems to me that a lot of this is kind of a form of humble bragging. It's sort of this idea of, oh, men are the worst. They're constantly coming at me, and all these powerful men throw themselves at me and want to have sex with me. Oh, woe is me. Whereas, you know, a lot of women would just be flattered that these, you know, powerful, rich men are sexually attracted to them. Which, you know, is not something that the vast majority of women can say for themselves.
Yeah, and you know, having met several very honest women in my life, you know, that's how I learned a lot of things, and that's why I never had problems with women, because I've had old and honest women in my life, in my, especially in my extended family. And as one of my old aunties used to say, she was saying, look, even if I don't want anything from a rich man, no money, no nothing, it is still flattering if he makes advances to me, and maybe I would do him once or twice, just because I can. Even if I don't want anything from him, I don't want a job from him, I don't want money, I don't want anything from him, it is still flattering. I mean, uh, this author, even though he tries to mildly put it in under many caveats, he's right in saying that in most cases this is really hardwired. And hypergamy is real, folks, and it's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's better to just acknowledge it and work around it, or work as keeping it in mind. It's nothing wrong with it, because this is another problem that we have with feminists. When they hear us speaking about, and not just feminists, gynocentrists in general, when they hear us speaking about hypergamy, they regard it as an attack on women, whereas in most cases we just don't. Well, sure, there are the kings of the MGTOW empire on YouTube who do it, who put it as an attack on women. But when I speak about hypergamy, I speak it as in a very cold-hearted manner, as in, yes, hypergamy is real. We need to take that into account, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, saying that women are hypergamous is not to say that women are evil or that there's something wrong with them. It's a perfectly natural and perfectly sensible adaptation to maximize their genetic fitness. It's if you're a woman and you want to propagate your genes, the best way to do that is to find a man who has the kind of resources, the kind of social status to allow you to have like a stable environment to bring up children that result from that relationship, to offer them the more resources, a better start in life, and of course better genes. And so it makes a lot of sense for women to be attracted to powerful, high status men. It's nothing wrong or sinister about that.
Yeah, it's not. In fact, in many ways, not being hypergamous even today could be quite an issue. And the same is true with men. I mean, yes, men will try, and usually will not just try, but will do most of the advances and most of the talkings and whatnot. And it's not something bad. It just is. Because I've seen even amongst the the pro men, I guess, part of the spectrum, they say, oh, but it is so bad that men have it. No, it's not bad. It's neither bad nor good. It just is. Acknowledging it and moving forward is just, it seems like the sane option to me.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's sort of partly cultural, this idea that women should be sort of bashful and sort of play hard to get. I think that's definitely at least partly a cultural attitude that
well, nothing is entirely genetic and nothing is entirely culture. Of course, it's partly cultural.
Yeah, and maybe some of these cultural attitudes can be changed, and to some extent they are changing, but it is what it is. It's not this sort of ideal that everything has to be split down 50-50 down the middle and everything should be equal. It's just insane. It's never going to work, and it's also no reason why it should work like that.
It is such as it cannot work. And I guess this is the difference between those of us with the more tragic, in the philosophical sense, tragic vision, as in to say, look, these are the facts, this is what it is, we can try to work within these constraints offered by the physical reality, and that's a tragic vision. And then there's the unconstrained, or I guess we could call it in the context of sexual politics, the revolutionary vision. And the revolutionary vision is, no, everything can be changed because everything is a construct, a social construct that can be altered and whatnot. And that's usually the path to misery.
Yeah, but also, like, even if it is a social construct, doesn't mean that it's easy to change. I mean, lots of things are social constructs. I mean,
laws against murder are social constructs. Should we change
also,
those?
I know the idea of mountains are a social construct. That particular configurations of atoms are regarded as mountains. Good luck changing that. Good luck having a culture that doesn't have any sort of concept of mountains.
Yeah.
Maybe if you like in the Netherlands, maybe you can do away with the concept of mountains if you never go outside.
Or in Estonia.
Country, but they're still mountains, but they're not really mountains. It's just like hills.
Yeah.
But there's lots of concepts that you just sort of have to have. A lot of cultural attitudes that you have to have for your society to work, and even if those are social constructs, doesn't mean it's easy to change.
Mm-hmm. And especially it doesn't mean they should change. I mean, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. Then there's also this business of and I think it is grossly exaggerated, being called an abuse denier and things like that. I think most people can definitely understand what we're talking about. I mean, if we were to publish this conversation on the BBC, we would get a lot of backlash from the usual suspects. But I think the overwhelming majority instinctively understands what we're talking about. I think the overwhelming majority doesn't perceive it as abuse denier. If you say, look, this is how men and women interact with each other, and if you put them in the workplace, they'll still interact with each other the same way they interact everywhere else. I mean, just because they have something else to do as well, namely to do the work they have been employed and are being paid for, that doesn't mean suddenly the rest of the human nature gets suspended somehow. I think most people can understand that.
Yeah, I mean, men and women are animals. They have certain instincts, they have certain natures about them, and it's not something that we can change. And of course, some of our behavior is due to cultural ideas, and again, these are not easy to change necessarily. But that's just what we have to work with, and this sort of idea that we can just have this sort of like perfect perfect delineation between work and not work, and just that you can just sort of turn off your nature as a sexually reproducing animal if you're at work. It just doesn't work. I mean, there's lots of relationships today that get started at work. Lots of people who meet at work for the first time who end up in long-term relationship and marriages. It's one of the most common ways of meeting a long-term partner today. Meeting someone at work. It's
my grandparents met at work in the 1940s, so I presume it has become a lot more common since the 1940s. Just saying. Yeah. Let's address a little bit another angle to this story, namely the angle that of the crowd that says, "Oh, this is a confirmation. We've always suspected that Hollywood and the BBC and many of these high offices of cultural power, let's put it this way, are in many ways sexually promiscuous or even sexually degenerate and whatnot." Is there something to that? I mean, do these kinds of offices tend to be much more sexually promiscuous than, I guess, I don't know, the office of a small company or the factory or whatnot, something more working class, more common folk oriented?
I think there's definitely something to that. I mean, just from an evolutionary standpoint, the reason men want power is to get laid.
Yeah,
it's of course
most of the time, yes,
an oversimplification, but
yeah, most of the time, yes.
That's basically basically the gist of it. So it would be shocking if these high-powered men would all just stick to one woman and never look at any other women, and never have any sort of sexual impropriety or sort of liaisons outside of marriage. It would be very naive to presume that. So I'm not shocked at all that such a thing goes on in Hollywood and in politics and among CEOs of large corporations, among famous athletes and so on. That's not surprising to me in the least. It's just what you would expect, given human nature as a sexually reproducing species, and given the sort of mathematics of male reproduction versus female reproduction.
Yeah, and what I do suspect, and I don't think this can be proven right or wrong, is that this has been going on since forever. It's just that because there is a certain crowd out there who has this feeling that, well, our political class or our cultural class or whatnot, they had more class, more tact. They were much more restrained, let's say in the 50s or in the 40s or I don't know, or in the 1850s. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think the plebs would just find out a bit much more rare than they do now.
Yeah, I think that's absolute nonsense. It's just that back in those days, it wasn't as widely reported in the media. It's something that there was like if you go back to say the 1950s or 60s or something in let's say America. You had a sort of gentleman's agreement that you don't really write about these sort of sex scandals that various politicians and other high-powered people were involved in. I mean, there was um, lots of politicians and so on have always had affairs and mistresses and so on. That it was just something that wasn't as widely publicized. It's only in the last 30 years or something like that that this sort of thing has been sort of been promoted like that in the media, and that there's that's so much of a scandal is being made about this sort of stuff, whereas in the past, which sort of kept hush hush.
Yeah, and but I guess there is a difference between being promoted, as in the sense we're right about it, and promoted in the sense of, oh my God, this is terrible. Because I'm always reminded by the case of François Mitterrand, former president of France, who had an official mistress. I mean, the mistress would go to the president through the front door of the Elysee Palace, and everyone knew about it, and no one cared. I guess this is something to say about culture. Something like that, I cannot imagine something like that happening even today in the United States. The the mistress to go through the front lawn of the White House, the official mistress. I don't think that could happen
Maybe
anytime
in the
soon.
Trump presidency, but probably not even there.
Not even with the current presidency. Not even with the current. I don't think that could be that would go down well. I guess it has something to do a little bit with culture because uh, if you dig up hard enough, there are stories about the sexual I guess today would be called sexual scandals of various people who were the architects of the Italian unification and whatnot in the 19th century and early 20th century, and it wasn't regarded as such a big deal, even though it was relatively well known. Whereas the scandals that are sometimes even milder than those published today in certain cultures is they're considered like a huge deal. Uh, because again, these kinds of examples. Oh, he put a knee to her. Come on, give me a break. It is a bit. It is a bit frustrating. It is even more frustrating if you're asked to comment about it because you're like, why do we have to comment about this? I mean, Peter Hitchens has a point when he says, look, this guy was the worst Secretary of Defense since whatever, since the 1970s. Maybe he should be forced to resign because of that, but forcing him to resign because he put a hand to someone's knee, maybe not. And it is really frustrating. And it appears to me, and I could be wrong, please correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears to me that this is the push of a very, very tiny class of people who want everyone else to believe like they do that this is really such a huge issue and it's really a big deal and it's really a big scandal. I don't think most people actually think like that, even in more prudish cultures, let's say in the United Kingdom, in Sweden, in the United States. I don't think even there most people think like that. I think it's I don't want to say a ploy, but I think it is the push of a very tiny class of people who want the rest of us to think like that.
Yeah, I mean, the Michael Fallon case, what he did was improper, and so the thing to do would be to apologize, which he did, and the woman said, it's fine, and that should have been the end of it, and that would have been the end of it in any sort of sane age, but nowadays, not so much.
Yeah, it just seems to me that it's such an alien topic forced upon the rest of the culture. Right. With that said, I think we've fit everything together. Amazing. We fit the long news section and Mike in the same show, and we still have 2 more minutes to put up the announcements. That's fantastic. Um, right. So the first and only announcement for me is that we'll see you again in November 24th. On November the 17th, I'll be very tired about around the time of the showtime, and then the next day I have a very public uh, event a la Ben Shapiro. I'm going into an Antifa place with my partner in crime with the Romanian language channel. We're going there to hold a sort of a panel talk with questions and answers. There are going to be a lot of leftists, hopefully some Antifas too, who will come and ask us questions and ask us to check our privilege and things like that. It's going to be fantastic. But I need to prepare that event, so I cannot also prepare a live podcast on November the 17th. So next podcast on November the 24th. Yeah, that's pretty much it. You also have an announcement or something. You need something to say.
Yeah, check out orthogonalideas.com, which is my blog. And then I guess we'll see you in 2 weeks. Until then, take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone.